Congresswoman Ilhan Omar started speaking, her tone thick with the rehearsed contempt she kept for the man at the resolute desk, and I use that title loosely. I am unsure what small power game you believe you are playing by calling me here, but let me be absolutely distinct. She stood tall with her arms folded, having declined the seat presented by a Secret Service agent, as this was her platform and she planned to command it. I am not one of your frightened little Republican lawmakers who kiss your ring. I stand for real people, actual Americans, not your wealthy pals and Mar-a-Lago allies. Her voice was a tool sharpened by hundreds of cable news spots and viral floor addresses. And she wasn't just talking to Trump. She was addressing her millions of devotees, the squad, and the whole progressive wave that saw her as a brave figure fighting a fascist rising. It was January the 28th, 2025, barely a week into Trump's second administration, and the Oval Office was washed in the chill, bright light of a winter afternoon. Yet the mood inside was far from luminous. This was not a standard congressional gathering, for there were no aides writing notes, no photographers snapping the event for history, and no press corps hovering outside. The chamber was strangely empty of the normal activity, containing only Trump resting quietly behind the giant oak desk and two senior officials waiting near the wall. FBI Director Christopher Wray clutched a pile of dense manila folders, and DHS Secretary Kristi Noem held her own documents, while two Secret Service agents remained like sculptures by the exits. The atmosphere felt medical, antiseptic, like a surgery room before an operation, and Omar had been called that morning by White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles. The notification was short and official, stating the president required Representative Omar's attendance at the Oval Office at 3 a.m. for a critical national security issue. There were no specifics and no reasons, merely an order. Yet Omar believed she understood precisely what this concerned. She imagined Trump, the loud-mouthed tyrant, was attempting to scare her regarding her increasingly loud critiques of Israel, her demands to slash military support, and her ceaseless assaults on his government's foreign strategy. She had arrived ready for a battle, having warned sympathetic media allies to ensure cameras would be standing by outside to film her bold departure. She had practiced her scripts, intending to demonstrate to her followers that she could confront the prejudiced authoritarian president and leave triumphant. Currently, she stood in the Oval Office, certain she possessed the advantage, believing her media fame shielded her and that her position as a prominent woman of color rendered her unreachable. She assumed Trump was merely another elderly, furious man she could overpower with virtuous anger, just as she had overpowered every other political rival in her profession. She possessed absolutely no concept of what was about to occur, and frankly, she proceeded, her volume increasing with every charge. An old man with 91 criminal charges who can hardly put a logical sentence together and who stirred a rebellion against his own state likely shouldn't be teaching anyone about anything. So if this gathering is regarding my remarks on Palestine, about identifying Israel's apartheid system, you can take your false anger and you are finished. President Trump's voice cut her off, not with a scream, but with a hushed, nearly uninterested inquiry. He watched calmly from behind his desk, not appearing furious, not even appearing especially irritated, but just sitting there with a faint, unreadable grin, as if he were viewing a mildly amusing television program that was beginning to bore him. Omar was briefly unsettled, as this was not the response she had anticipated, asking herself where the red-faced fury was and where the protective tirade was. "No, I am not finished," she barked, attempting to reclaim the energy. "You wish to discuss national security, but you are the national security danger. You are a bigot who barred Muslims from coming into this nation. You are a fascist who places kids in cages. And you are everything incorrect with America packaged in a poor suit and terrible spray tan. She tipped forward, resting her hands on the rim of the resolute desk, her physical stance hostile and argumentative. You believe you can hush me, but I have millions of fans. I have CNN and MSNBC and every major progressive group protecting me. You are a frail old man acting like a tough guy because that is all you understand how to do, while your own party hardly stands you, and half your cabinet believes you are losing your wits. You want to intimidate me, yet I am not afraid of you, for I faced worse than you. I escaped a civil war, and I arrived in this land with zero. I have been marked by bigots my entire life, and you are simply another tormentor who thinks his authority makes him powerful. But you are zero. You are a sad old man who— Sit down. Trump's voice instantly sliced through her speech. Not loud, not enraged, but simply frigid and final. The tone of a man who had managed billion-dollar companies and wasn't requesting obedience. Omar stopped mid-phrase, the language dying in her throat, as something in his pitch and the pure undeniable authority of it caused her to pause. I said sit down, Trump stated again, his sound still peaceful but holding a hidden rim of iron. Because what I am about to display to you is going to alter your whole existence, and you are going to wish to be seated when you hear it. For the initial moment since walking into the room, Omar sensed a spark of real doubt, for this was not unfolding like the political drama she had imagined. Trump ought to have been screaming back at her by this point, so slowly and hesitantly she dropped herself into the seat opposite his desk, her assurance beginning to tremble just a bit. Trump leaned closer, his look shifting as the faint grin vanished, replaced by something chillier, more grave, and nearly predatory. You believe you are here due to your Palestine comments, he said softly. You believe I give a damn about your tweets. But I don't care what you state about Israel. I don't care about your rallies. And I don't care about your chats with CNN. You are here because, for the last 6 months, the FBI has been probing you for terrorism funding and immigration deceit. He shoved one of the dense binders across the shiny top of the desk towards her, the noise of the paper gliding against the timber feeling terribly noisy in the quiet space. And this morning I declassified the whole thing. Omar felt her blood turn icy, looking at the binder as if it were a poisonous viper curled on the desk. Trump proceeded, his tone matter-of-fact and almost chatty. Your brother-in-law in Mogadishu, Ahmed Noor, is an al-Shabaab funder. Treasury marked his money transfer firm as a terrorism financing body. And the cash you have been wiring to him, $78,000 over 3 years, goes straight to terrorists. Omar's mouth became arid. I don't know what your citizenship, she stuttered. But Trump interrupted her, disregarding her tried disruption. Obtained via fraud, he stated evenly. You stated your mother passed in Somalia, but she is alive, residing in London, and we possess passport logs of you visiting her. You stated you arrived as a refugee escaping violence, yet you utilized a false family name to be eligible for refugee status, meaning you enacted immigration fraud to get here. He reclined in his seat, observing the color fade from her visage. So here is what is going to occur, Trump said, presenting the conditions of her defeat. You have 72 hours to quit Congress and depart the United States willingly. You renounce your fake citizenship. You get on a flight, and you return to Somalia or London to reside with your deceased mother or wherever else will accept you. You do that, and all of this remains silent, and you can frame your resignation however you wish, be it health reasons, family causes, or whatever tale you desire to narrate. He halted, allowing the proposal to hover in the atmosphere for a long, painful second. Or, he went on, his pitch falling deeper, you decline, and tomorrow morning I conduct a press briefing in the Rose Garden, where I declassify every single sheet of this inquiry. I reveal the terrorism funding, the immigration lies, and the FBI watch list you have been on since 2018. Then I sign an executive order starting denaturalization actions on national security bases. DHS captures you. You get held while you battle it in court for the subsequent 2 years. You lose because the proof is crushing. Your citizenship gets removed. And then ICE deports you to Somalia publicly with every camera on Earth looking. Trump's voice became softer, more personal. Easy path or hard path. Your option. You have got 72 hours. Omar sat paralyzed, her brain unable to handle the pure magnitude of the disaster unfolding in front of her. This could not be actual. This had to be a trick, some type of complex intimidation scheme. "You cannot do this," she eventually whispered, her sound thin and stressed. "This is unconstitutional. You cannot just strip a member of Congress." "Director Wray," Trump said, not removing his eyes from Omar, "show her what we possess so she comprehends this is not a trick." FBI Director Christopher Wray moved ahead, opening one of his binders with the systematic care of a lifelong law enforcement officer. His look was totally unbiased and professional, as this was merely evidence to him, and as Wray started presenting 6 months of inquiry, the wire transfers, the spy photos, the birth records, and the marriage logs, Omar understood with increasing terror that this was not a trick at all. This was actual, and her whole existence was about to be ruined. And to comprehend how we arrived here, how the assured, resistant Congresswoman who had walked into the Oval Office prepared for a political brawl ended up facing deportation, you have to go back 4 hours prior to a moment when Ilhan Omar still believed she was safe. Director Wray did not require a stage, as his hush medical delivery held a burden that a scream never could. He fixed his spectacles and opened the initial binder, putting a sequence of high-definition bank reports and wire transfer slips on the rim of the Resolute desk, just inside Ilhan Omar's line of vision. "Congresswoman," Wray started, his tone empty of political hatred, which made it far more freezing. "For the last 6 months, the FBI's counterterrorism unit has been charting a financial web we term the Mogadishu map. It began with a string of red flags from the Treasury's FinCEN database, and between 2022 and 2024, you started 17 distinct wire transfers to a man called Ahmed Noor in Mogadishu. The sums were continually carefully measured. $3,000, $4,500, never crossing the $10,000 mark that sparks an automatic federal alert. Wray took out a spy photo of a dirty shop front in Somalia. You sent this cash via Tawakal Express, a Hawala network. You have told your fans these were basic remittances to assist your family. But Ahmed Noor is not merely your brother-in-law, he is a high-level enabler for al-Shabaab. We possess intercepts of Ahmed talking about operational aid and logistical clearing utilizing the funds you supplied. And specifically, we tracked $8,000 of your March 2023 transfer straight to an explosives specialist in Lower Shabelle. You did not just send cash to a relation. You financed the buying of IED parts used against African Union peacekeepers. Omar's lips parted, but no noise emerged, as the virtuous fury she had entered with was being substituted by a chill, empty fear. Wray did not wait for her to bounce back. You sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. You have gotten the classified reports on how these Hawala webs are utilized to tax remittances and finance terror. You knew precisely what Ahmed was, and you utilized your office to conceal the smurfing of $78,000 into a war zone. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem moved forward then, her look one of barely hidden distaste. And she didn't utilize a folder, she utilized a tablet, swiping through a sequence of official files. "Let us discuss your origin tale, Ilhan," Noem said, her sound piercing. "The sad refugee who lost her mother to the Civil War is a gripping story. But the only issue is that it is a complete lie. Your mother, Fadumo Aden, did not perish in Somalia in the 80s. She is very much alive and dwelling in a humble apartment in East London. We possess her British National Health Service logs, her utility invoices, and most crucially, we possess the flight lists. Noem knocked on the screen, displaying a blurry but undeniable picture of Omar walking through Heathrow Airport. You have visited her 8 times since 2015. You were in London last October, and while you were telling American voters about the mother you lost to violence, you were having tea with her in Newham. You lied on your first asylum form, you lied on your citizenship paper, and you have lied to the American populace for a decade. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, that is material deception, it makes your citizenship void and invalid. And then there is the issue of your name, Noem went on, her tone falling into a lethal hush. You were not born an Omar, you are Ilhan Nur, and you took a fake family identity to qualify for refugee status under a family reunification plan you wouldn't have otherwise been fit for. And the man you wed in 2009, Ahmed Nur Said Elmi, same father, Ilhan, and we have the Kenyan refugee camp school logs listing you both as siblings. You wed your own brother to enact immigration fraud and bring him into this nation. Trump leaned closer, his hands joined on the desk, his eyes fixed on Omar's pale face. You wish to speak about frightened little Congressman Ilhan, but you are the one who appears frightened now. And you ought to be, because the FBI doesn't just hold theories. They possess the DNA, they possess the records, and they possess the wiretaps. You have spent your career mocking this nation, calling it bigoted and fractured, while you were utilizing it as a personal savings account for terrorists and a playground for your own deceit. He rose up, the motion sluggish and purposeful, towering over the desk. So here is the bargain, and I am only stating it once. You have 72 hours to quit your seat, renounce the citizenship you stole, get on a flight, and go to Somalia or London or wherever else will accept a convicted cheater. You do it silently, and this remains in this chamber. You get to keep your heritage for the history books, even if it is a falsehood. Trump leaned down, his voice falling to a murmur that felt like a physical burden. Or you walk out that exit and attempt to play the victim one final time. And tomorrow at noon, I hold a press briefing in the Rose Garden. I show the Mogadishu map to every news outlet on Earth. I show the pictures of your dead mother. I announce the federal RICO charge for terrorism funding. And then I have the DHS take you into custody right there on the lawn. You will be in a holding center for 3 years while we remove your citizenship. And then you will be deported in cuffs, no cameras, no rallies, no squad, just a one-way ticket back to the Civil War you allegedly fled. He looked at the grandfather clock in the nook. The clock is ticking, Ilhan. 72 hours, easy path, or the hard path. What is it going to be? The quiet in the Oval Office following Trump's demand was dense, punctuated only by the steady ticking of the grandfather clock and the weak drone of the White House air system. Ilhan Omar, the woman who had walked in with the stride of a victor, now sat collapsed in her seat, the $78,000 Mogadishu map, and the pictures of her living mother staring back at her like tombstones. For the initial time in her public existence, the rehearsed speech about justice and fairness felt like hollow repeats. She looked at the faces around her, Trump's removed amusement, Ray's medical disinterest, and Noam's plain loathing, and realized that the political shield she had worn for years was paper-thin against the burden of federal proof. When she was finally guided from the room, she didn't head for the cameras. She ignored the frantic texts from her communications director, Maya, who was still waiting for the "I told him off" statement. Instead, she retreated to her car, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold her phone, and her first call was to the one person she believed could move the needle, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. "Alex, it is a trap," Omar whispered into the phone, her voice cracking. "He has got files. He is talking about Ahmed in Mogadishu. He is talking about London. He is talking about the marriage. And he is threatening denaturalization." There was a long, chilling pause on the other end of the line before AOC's voice came back cautious. stripped of its usual revolutionary fervor. Ilhan, when you say he has files, what kind of files? Is there a paper trail? Because if there is a financial link to Al-Shabaab, even a remote one, we cannot touch this. The realization hit Omar like a physical blow that the squad wasn't a suicide pact, it was a political alliance. As the night wore on, the sisterhood she had relied on began to go silent. Her calls to Rashida Tlaib went to voicemail, and Ayanna Pressley's chief of staff offered thoughts and prayers, but no commitment to a joint press conference. Even the friendly producers at MSNBC, who usually clamored for her appearances, were suddenly booked through the weekend. She sat in her dark living room watching the 72-hour clock vanish, realizing Trump hadn't just attacked her, he had isolated her. He had shown the people who held the power to defend her that doing so would mean tethering their own careers to a sinking ship of fraud and terror. She pulled out a burner phone and dialed a number in London, and her mother answered on the second ring. "Oh, they know who yo," Omar said in Somali, tears finally spilling over. "They have the photos of us at Heathrow. They know you are not dead." The silence from the other side of the Atlantic was the sound of a decade-long deception finally collapsing. Her mother's living, breathing existence, once a private comfort, was now the primary evidence of her daughter's criminal path to power. As the second day of the ultimatum began, Omar's legal team arrived at her home. But they didn't bring hope. They brought a spreadsheet of sentencing guidelines. They explained that if the DHS moved for denaturalization, the standard was not beyond a reasonable doubt, but a preponderance of evidence. And the evidence of her identity fraud was a mountain. "Ilhan," her lead counsel said, leaning across her kitchen table, "if he holds that press conference, you aren't just losing your seat. You are losing your children's right to see you outside of a glass partition. He is offering you a way to stay out of a cage. And if you fight this, you are choosing to be a martyr for a cause that will abandon you the moment the first wire transfer is read on the news." She looked at her reflection in the window, the woman who had dared the world to silence her. She realized then that Trump wasn't bluffing because he didn't have to. He had the receipts, he had the DNA, and he had the absolute lack of mercy. The media allies she thought were her shield were actually just mirrors reflecting whatever power she had. And now that her power was hemorrhaging, the mirrors were turning away. She reached for a pen and a single sheet of congressional stationery, and the fearless warrior was gone. In her place was a woman who had 24 hours left to decide if she wanted to be a free woman in Somalia or a prisoner in America. The final 24 hours of the ultimatum felt like a slow-motion descent into a bottomless canyon. Ilhan Omar sat in her office, the door locked, the lights dimmed, surrounded by the physical remnants of a career that was effectively already over. The decision was finalized at 3 a.m. on Friday morning, and with a hand that felt like lead, Omar signed the single-page resignation letter. It was a masterpiece of tactical ambiguity, citing unforeseen personal and family health challenges that require my presence and undivided attention. There was no mention of the Oval Office, no mention of the FBI, and no mention of the 72-hour clock. She was ceding her power, her platform, and her identity as an American legislator in exchange for her freedom. But the resignation was only the first half of the deal. The second half required her to be out of the country before the press conference Trump had scheduled for noon. At the private terminal, the air was cold and smelled of jet fuel, and FBI Director Christopher Wray was there, standing near the stairs of the Gulf Stream. He didn't gloat. He didn't even look satisfied. He simply handed her a final document, a voluntary renunciation of her U.S. citizenship on the grounds of material misrepresentation. "Sign this, and the folder stays closed," Wray said, his voice flat and clinical. "The moment this plane enters international airspace, the declassification order is rescinded. You go to Mogadishu, you stay there, and the United States government forgets you ever existed." Omar took the pen, her signature a jagged scrawl on the bottom of the form. She handed it back to Ray, her eyes burning with a mixture of rage and defeat, and didn't say a word as she climbed the stairs. As the door hissed shut and the engines began to whine, she looked out the small porthole, seeing the lights of Washington as a distant twinkling grid. She was no longer a congresswoman, no longer a citizen, and no longer the face of a movement. She was a woman on a one-way flight to a country she had spent 30 years claiming to have fled, carrying nothing but the weight of a dozen secrets. The easy way had led her to an altitude of 30,000 feet. Heading east into a sunrise she wasn't sure she was ready to face. The announcement of Representative Ilhan Omar's resignation hit the Washington press corps at exactly 10 a.m. on Friday, like a seismic event for which there had been no warning. The official statement from her office was barely 2 paragraphs long, stripped of the usual fiery rhetoric and calls to action that had defined her political identity for nearly a decade. It spoke of pressing personal and family health matters and a need to return to my roots to facilitate a period of healing. It was a masterpiece of tactical vagueness, but to the seasoned reporters at the Capitol, it smelled of a catastrophic collapse. The woman who had been scheduled to lead a massive anti-administration rally over the weekend had simply vanished from the legislative roster. The release of the declassified files was not a leak. It was a deliberate surgical strike launched from the White House briefing room at exactly noon on Saturday, while Ilhan Omar's plane was still somewhere over the Atlantic. The Mogadishu map was uploaded to a public federal portal and simultaneously broadcast on every major network. The file, officially titled Project Horizon, Forensic Analysis of Foreign Financial and Identity Misrepresentation, was nearly 400 pages of clinical, devastating detail. It didn't just contain accusations, it contained bank records, surveillance logs, and high-resolution scans of birth certificates and passport entries that spanned 3 decades. The refugee success story that had been the cornerstone of Omar's political identity didn't just crack, it shattered into 1,000,000 irreparable pieces. While the financial disclosures were enough to trigger a federal indictment, it was the identity fraud section of the files that truly stunned the nation. DHS Secretary Kristi Noem presented the London Files, a series of documents that directly contradicted Omar's public claims about her family. The files included British National Health Service records for Faduma Aden, Omar's mother, whom she had repeatedly claimed died during the Somali Civil War. The records showed Aden living in a modest flat in East London with utility bills and pension statements dating back to 1991. Most damning were the flight manifests. Since 2015, Ilhan Omar had visited London 8 times, with surveillance photos showing her leaving Heathrow Airport and heading directly to the address where her dead mother resided. The reaction in Minneapolis's 5th Congressional District was not a singular wave of anger, but a fractured, chaotic explosion of disbelief, betrayal, and civil unrest. For nearly a decade, Ilhan Omar had been more than just a politician to the Cedar Riverside neighborhood. She was a living, breathing monument to the American refugee dream. On the morning the Mogadishu map went viral, the famous mural of Omar on the side of a brick building in the heart of the district became the focal point of a community in agony. By noon, the mural had been defaced, not by outside agitators, but by local residents who felt the weight of a 10-year lie crashing down on their own identities. Ilhan Omar's arrival in Mogadishu was nothing like the triumphant homecoming she had once envisioned during her years as a rising star in American politics. There were no cheering crowds at Aden Ada International Airport, no red carpet, and no official delegation from the Somali government. Instead, as the private Gulfstream taxied to a remote corner of the rain-slicked tarmac, it was met by a small, heavily armed security detail and a handful of somber officials from the Somali National Intelligence and Security Agency. The air in Mogadishu was thick with heat and the scent of salt from the nearby Indian Ocean, a sharp contrast to the clinical, air-conditioned silence of the aircraft she had called home for the last 18 hours. By 2027, the woman who had once commanded the attention of the global media and the loyalty of millions of progressive voters had faded into a profound functional irrelevance. She lived in a modest apartment in the Hoden district, away from the fortified villas of the international zone. She had no political office, no security detail, and no public platform. Her daily life was spent working as a high-level interpreter and consultant for humanitarian agencies, a job she secured only because of her fluent English and her remaining knowledge of Western bureaucracy. Ilhan Omar died in Mogadishu in the summer of 2039, and her passing was a footnote in the American papers.